After Wendy gets done, obviously in this room, didn't even have never met him or don't know a lot about him because obviously my father died in 1958. But they can give a little story about maybe Fred Mansell because they all knew him and they knew him as a young whippersnapper too, didn't they? So
in the apartment right across from our house, right next door. The only thing that separated us was a gangway. And it was our bedroom window next to the dining room, their dining room. And I can remember many times Aunt Lorraine would be tapping on the window and she'd ask for sugar, milk, and we could
bucket
just
of coal.
Yeah, bucket of coal, and we would just hand it through the window. That's a small thing I remember.
that's great. Thank you.
Bedroom window where we could pass back and forth. But my recollection of Uncle Fred was he was always dapper, handsome,
Full of hell.
Full hell, yeah.
Funny.
Funny, suit and tie, many of the times. And one of the recollections, more not so much of him, but of Aunt Lorraine and Grandma Consular.
Yes.
I remember her being there a lot, all the time, and they'd write me out little notes, and I'd go to the corner store for them, stuff like that. But I remember her being with Aunt Lorraine a lot. Yeah. And the kids, we just played together. I mean, the kids, Mary and Sissy and Laureen were more. They're a few years younger than me, but I was in that age bracket, and we played in the yard.
Candy and Jody.
Yeah.
Tommy.
Yeah. But growing up, played the street games and whatever else.
Roller skating.
Roller skating. Yeah. So, and I think when they moved, I think Daddy was the baby.
Alice was Daddy.
Or Alice was
Alice
the
was
baby.
baby.
And I don't remember much of that part, but I do remember them. Mostly that passing across the gangway.
No, when you mentioned that about when they moved, I can remember your mom, Aunt Lorraine, coming over. She would come over at night after everybody was in bed, probably, and Betty and I were in high school by then. And my dad would be at the firehouse. She'd never come over on a night my dad was home. The nights he was home, Betty was at the firehouse. She'd come over, and she'd have a cup of tea with my mother. And I can remember her sitting there and talking about, I don't remember, it was right after the war, about this deal about buying this property out in Palos and getting just the two-room place built or something. I can remember her sitting there talking to my mom and asking my mom's advice. Did she think that's what she should do? Or because I think the people upstairs where they rented, daughter wanted the apartment downstairs, and so they were kind of pushing them. And I remember that so well, playing with her sitting there talking to my mom about it. But Fred, I remember, and I was younger then, but I can remember being over at Grandma's, and she had the big back dining room with the big round table. Table was probably this bigger. And I can remember your dad coming home from the CC camp, civilian Corps, whatever Corps. It was during the war, right after, or during the Depression. It was before the war, now that I think about it. And I can remember them, they had this big dinner and everything, and Fred was home, and then he had to go back. I remember that, and he and Uncle Fred, he and Uncle Bill together were hysterical. They would sit, and Bill would be at one end of the table, and your dad would be at the other end, and they would take a spoon. Don't you remember them doing that? And they'd bounce. He'd put a piece of bread, and bounce it to the other end of the table, and her grandma, And I remember Bill one time picking up a cup, and it had a little crack in it. And he did this just to aggravate Grandma. And he'd take the cup and throw it over his shoulder on the dining room table. But the two of them together were so funny. We used to have a good time with him. But yeah, he was very baseball. I remember him playing ball.
Yeah.
And he and Danny Early, who was just older than a year older than me, spent a lot of time together when they were
The Bluebell Lounge.
Yes, the Bluebell Lounge, exactly.
That was on Lewis.
It was just a block over. You'd go through the alleyway after there'd be the bar.
And that's it. I remember, like from Mary down to Alice and Dottie. But all of the younger kids, by that time I was out of high school. I was in nurses training, My husband was in the Air Force, and I moved to England after we got married and lived there for 3 years. So I kind of lost track of all of you then. After that.
Well, then you start moving away too as the
Yeah.
years went by.
Right, yeah. Do you ever remember Daddy singing with like a harmony group? It might have been his like a little gang at the tavern or something.
Probably.
But I know he loved to
Either
sing.
that or him and Danny
Sing
and
on
Jimmy
the corner or
Cringer.
something. I remember hearing stories about that,
But he and Danny and Jimmy Cringer used to sing, at family things.
maybe that,
They
you know.
together, yeah.
Yeah, Fred was very well liked.
I know he.
He had lots of friends.
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody loved him.
And he was the one.